Hi there, it's Donna at redcarpetlearning.com, and I am so excited to bring you another expert interview with Donna. And I'm especially excited today because this is a friend of mine from NSA, that's the National Speakers Association, Lenora Billings-Harris. She is a diversity and inclusion strategist who specializes in helping organizations make diversity and inclusion a competitive advantage. She's the author of a couple of books, 2 books, and she is included among the top 100 thought leaders on diversity by the Society of Human Resource Management. Lenora is a past president of the Global Speakers Federation and was recently inducted into the Speakers Hall of Fame. I was blessed to be able to watch that happen. It was such an exciting moment. And Lenora is also a recipient of the Cavett Award given by the National Speakers Association for someone who, gives so much of themselves to the community, to the other members, and really lives up to the spirit of our founder in that association. She has also done award-winning research in diversity and inclusion, and that has been published in academic journals. She has worked with clients such as NASA, the Ritz-Carlton Hotels, FedEx, Toyota, West Point, and Johnson & Johnson, as well as numerous professional associations and universities. And additionally, Lenora serves on the adjunct faculty of the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. Now, although she currently lives in the United States, she has presented to audiences on 6 continents. You've got me beat there, Lenora, like 5. And 40 countries, plus in the middle of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. That's amazing. So I'm just so excited to have her. Please welcome, and I will welcome Lenora Billings-Harris. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Donna. Boy, it is just a pleasure, and I'm humbled to be on the show. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you very much. And let me go ahead and just jump in and answer a question that everybody asks whenever they hear the introduction and hear that I've spoken in the middle of the Atlantic and the Pacific. Yeah. So of course, people will assume that I was on a ship, and I was fortunate to be what they call a guest lecturer on various cruises, and they need you speaking when you're at sea. So I was at sea in the Pacific and at sea in the Atlantic. However, ground-wise, I also have presented in the Atlantic in Bermuda, so that's sort of in the middle, and Fiji in the Pacific. So it worked out that way.
Oh, that is great. That's amazing. And you certainly are extremely well-traveled. I mean, diversity is definitely, for someone who speaks on your topic, it's just amazing. And you have the name of your company is Ubuntu Global. Did I get that right?
You got it right. Yes.
Tell us what is Ubuntu?
So I realized that I was put on the planet to do this work, the work in the space of diversity and inclusion. I really, really got that clear message on one of my trips to South Africa. I'd been going there several times. In any case, once I realized that that's the lane I was picking and that's where I was going to stay, I also learned the proverb Ubuntu. So it comes from, the word is a Zulu word, and the translation is, I am because we are because I am. And so I use it as the foundation to all of the work that I do, because in the broadest sense of what is diversity and especially inclusion, that proverb speaks to it. All of us are connected. All of us need one another. And I thought, well, that really defines the message for me. So Ubuntu Global.
That is perfect. I love that. And I noticed I don't know if you do in your presentations, but I noticed in on your website that you asked people to take the Ubuntu pledge.
Yes.
I love that. Now I have a deeper meaning of that. Thank you. And let's start. You know, we're going to have a conversation about diversity and inclusion. Let's start with define diversity for
Mhm.
me.
Well, and you know, oftentimes when I'm speaking to a prospective client, they will say, you know, we really haven't gone down that path very much yet, and they're almost embarrassed to tell me that in the 21st century. However, they're right along with so many other people. So and organizations, I'm really glad that you asked the question, because there is confusion about it. Most of the time when people hear the term diversity, they think, oh, it has to do with race and sex or race and gender.
Mhm.
That's partly what it's about. But the real definition, and I try to keep things very grassroots in the way that I talk about this whole topic. The kind of what I mean by grassroots is just very basic, easy to understand. We don't need to use all of whatever the latest buzzwords are,
Mhm.
because I think sometimes people get so strategic they don't know what to do day to day. So to answer your question of what is diversity, the easiest way to think about it is diversity means who's on your team. So when you're thinking of the team that you work with, the team in your whole organization, who's on it? Do they all look alike, act alike, have the same values, come from the same cultures? That would mean it's a homogeneous kind of team. Or do you have different people, different attitudes, different people that look different and act different? That would be diversity. Because diversity, in the simplest form, simply means difference. And the fact of the matter is, human beings, each of us is different. I refer to it as being a culture of one. Each of us is a culture of one.
Yes.
And organizations today that want to really succeed and prosper, so not just survive, more organizations realize they need to have more diversity, meaning people who are different from one another. So think of it as who's on the team. And then the inclusion part is who gets to play. Because a lot of
Oh.
organizations have done a pretty good job of bringing in diversity. Where they misstep is they haven't done as good a job on the inclusion piece, getting them in, but not asking them to play. And then they wonder why there's a revolving door. They don't retain people who are different.
Yeah, that is so great. I just, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking this is a conversation we're having on my team as well. And even one of the most recent hires that we have, I was looking at two people and they both had, you know, the great assessments and they both had great um, the skills. And I really believe that both of them could do the job. And one of my team members that was interviewing them with me said we had this one woman who was really like bubbly and very, you know, very sort of red carpet culture. And the other was lovely and steady and quieter. And, you know, of course, my personality sort of leans one way, right? And my team member said to me, you know, do we really, this one is more like us. Do we really need another person who's just like us? And so
Perfect.
we ended up hiring the other person who's been amazing, or she is just what we needed on the team. And
Yes.
so I just love that definition of diversity, because you become a stronger team when you have a more diverse team.
Exactly. Exactly. One of the I'll paraphrase a quote because I don't have it in front of me right now to get it exactly right. But back when the Chicago Bulls were just constantly winning everything, and Phil Jackson was their coach, one of the things that he said in an interview was, as a coach, my job is to go out and get the best talent. So get the best talent on the team, and he had a lot of best talent. He said, then my job is to help that best talent, all of whom are different, know how to work together as a team.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's bringing diversity and inclusion together, because the team is stronger when people value and respect each other. And he came to that realization when they weren't winning. because each of the team members were going out being their individual selves, but not valuing other team members and sharing and listening and all of that. And it so applies to the workplace today. Now, for people that don't like sports analogies, because again, I'm thinking from my diversity and inclusion perspective, another way to think about it is diversity is who gets invited to the party, and inclusion is who gets asked to dance.
Oh, nice. That's perfect. That's so perfect. Well, thank you for that. Well, and as you know, when I asked you to do this, it came from a really specific experience that I had, which is that I was on a panel at a conference talking about employee retention and recruitment and retention, but really with a focus on retention. And we had a great audience with really insightful questions. And one of the audience members said, this has all been great. I'm not hearing a lot of talk about diversity, was the way he worded it. And how does that play in to employee retention, employee recruitment? And I know we all had some sort of answer, and I'll just speak for myself. I really left feeling like, wow, for as important as this is, this is something my team and I talk about all the time at Red Carpet. And we have a statement of diversity that we are really committed to living. At the same time, I don't feel like I had the best answer for him. And so I thought, who would? And of course, your name was at the top of my list. So let me just ask that question, really looking at both recruitment and retention. How does diversity and inclusion fit into that?
It fits in such an important way, and oftentimes in a way that day to day people just don't think about, because we do have a tendency, to your point earlier, we do have a tendency to hire people who are just like us, whether it's personality wise or whether it's gender or they went to the same school, any of those kind of things. And we don't think about it a whole lot. Because we immediately say, well, that person must be wonderful. I graduated from University of Michigan, and I remember when I was in the corporate world in an HR position, that I'd see a resume come across my desk, and if they went to U of M, I just assumed, well, they must be smart, because I went there, and all of us do that to some level. But when we do that, we don't realize how we may be missing who really is not only the best talent, but the right talent. So the way diversity and inclusion connect to retention and recruiting in the first place is organizations first have to be clear about whether having more diversity of thought, because that's ultimately what it's about. Why do we want to have people who are different on a team? So that you have diversity of thought rather than everybody having groupthink.
Right.
And to get that diversity of thought, that means obviously you need to look at your recruiting practices. Are you going to the same places? Are you falling into the biases that many of us do? And I'll get back to that in a moment. There are many from a recruiting and retention perspective. So are you looking in different places so that you can surface whoever might be the right talent for you? And one of the big ones, by the way, for those organizations that recruit on college campuses is they get comfortable with going to the same place all the time. But if you're always going to the same place, you may get some diversity of students, because again, each of us is a culture of one, but universities have certain philosophies that covers, all of academia and all of their culture. So you want to think about, where else might I look? And do I always, we talk about this in the tech world with my tech clients, do you only hire people that went to MIT or Stanford? There are engineers, fabulous engineers, that have gone to many different schools that you may be overlooking when you want that, again, that diversity of thinking, which, by the way, is important because they're realizing there's bias in artificial intelligence, because it's programmers that program that information, and they program it based on their bias. So in any case, so you start looking at different places where you recruit. You want to look at the job descriptions you've developed. Are the job descriptions written in a way using words that tend to sound more male, so they'll attract more males?
Oh.
Or Do you have a good balance between words that would be perceived to be more masculine or more feminine? Because we are finding that for some jobs where they say, gee, we want more women, they describe it in such a way that it isn't appealing to a woman that might apply. So, and you have to have diversity of people around the table looking at that, otherwise you're not going to recognize what those words might be. And then here's the one thing that many, several, not many, meaning not enough in my opinion, but what several organizations are now doing, especially since so much of the applying for jobs is online, is whoever the first person is that sources the resumes, that person didacts, covers up name, what school they went to, where they live, anything that might show their age, and anything that might show their race or ethnicity. So their fraternities or sororities, they cover up all of those things so that they're only looking at skills and abilities. And then when they give their list of people to be interviewed, the interviewers are also, when they are going through, like they have to go through 30 to get it down to 10 people to interview, they're only looking at skills and abilities as it relates to the job they're hiring for. So the bias will still come in, obviously, when a person shows up, either on a Zoom call or in person. You're going to see that what their gender is, and you'll know what their name is, but at least they have gotten their foot in the door if they have the qualifications, because we know through a good deal of research that people's resumes get pushed aside based on their names. They get pushed aside based on gender and ethnicity and so many other factors. So more organizations are trying to get beyond what some of those biases are. Then on the retention side, you need to look at what the culture of the organization is, because if you bring people in who are very different and the culture is not ready, then it'll be a revolving door. So the culture needs to learn, how do I bring that person in? How do I make sure that person knows they are really welcome? We accept them as 100% human being. We don't expect that they have to change their hair, wear different clothes, speak however we speak. What are the things that we need to do in order to create that inclusive environment? And that's where the real hard work is, because we're talking about very specific behaviors. In my world, we call it micro messaging, those micro things that either turn people on or turn them away.
I love that. I love that. And you're so right. I'm so glad you said that about culture, Lenora, because honestly, in this particular panel, even, that was my message. It really, they were talking about employee retention, and, there a lot of what was coming up was this program worked and this program worked and this program worked. And my message was, that's not actually where you start. You first start with the culture that you want build, and then and then you look at, okay, what program is a tactic or a strategy to kind of help you with that employee retention, but it has to fit with your culture. So the idea of, let's first build a culture of inclusivity before we perhaps strategically go after certain groups, or and then cause a problem in the. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about, especially when it comes to looks, like in terms of, the clothes people wear and the way they wear their hair and all of that. How do you reconcile that with, perhaps, like, we work in senior living a lot. So you're working with customers who are either the very early baby boomers, or the traditionalist generation, who may not be used to that and may not be as forgiving. And so how do you reconcile, like, wanting to be open and inclusive and diverse with maybe the culture and the people that you serve, and how accepting they may not be?
Really excellent question, and a tough one also. I've done a reasonable amount of work with physicians specifically, healthcare in general, and with schools of medicine. And one of their challenges is exactly what you just shared is, well, we may have diversity on our staff, all of the staff, doctors and nurses, as well as all of the rest of the staff. And we may be inclusive among ourselves, but what do we do when that patient says, I don't want this doctor? So each hospital or each healthcare service providing organization has to make decisions around that. The same would be true in senior living. And you need to make the decisions about it, meaning what your policy is, before you have the confrontation, so to speak. Because that's where the challenge is there isn't anything in writing on what do we do in this circumstance, and then they're faced with it, and kind of everything falls apart. So what I would say, two things. One is that if you are hiring the best and the right talent, then you also need to be aware of the biases you have internally, as well as the biases that your clients and your patients might have. However, you don't want to hire just based on what you think your clients and patients' biases are, because you don't know for sure what they are. Now, you'll have some general sense. And to your point, baby boomers, that may be the patient or the people in senior living, all of us have bias. So let me be clear. We have a tendency to think that bias is a bad thing. Bias is normal. It's a human condition. All of us have it, and it helps us get through the day. So that is, we have judgments about things, yes, no, right, wrong, safe, not safe, etc. So all of us have them. However, we tend to focus on the ones that kind of get us in trouble, or lead to negative consequences. So you can't control the biases of your patients or the biases of your clients. And therefore, that means you have to set up policies and procedures in your organization that if something comes up where a client or a patient or a resident makes a biased request, I only want to work with so-and-so because of their racism, sexism, homophobia, whatever it might be, then you want to have thought through ahead of time with your team how to address that. So I'll give you one example of one of the medical schools that I've done work with, and what they do at their sites around the state that they're in. They were having challenges where a patient either didn't want to have an African-American doctor, or they didn't want to have someone they presumed to be Muslim. It turned out the doctor wasn't Muslim, but people jump to conclusions.
Right.
And so what they ultimately did is they created a policy, and they had all of the people in charge to practice their response. So they literally did some role playing around it. And their response was, in this case, it was patients. So if the patient is not in critical care, it's not an intensive emergency, you got to do something, because in that case, you just have to do what you have to do to help keep the patient alive. But if it was something not that critical, then the doctor, if the patient said something directly to the doctor they don't want to work with, like they may say, send me somebody else, I don't want to work with you, then that doctor would say, I'm the doctor on duty, and I have the skills to do this, this is my area, or whatever, something along that line based on whatever their personality is. The doctor, and I say doctor, but the medical professional, whoever it is, would also bring in the physician on duty, whoever was in charge on duty, who already would know how he or she is going to answer that patient. And one of the ways that they answer that patient is, well, Dr. Cutting not only is the doctor on duty, but she is also the best qualified for your condition. If we were to bring someone else in, that would not be the best person. And most of the time that works. If it doesn't, and here's the tough part, what in this medical practice, what they decided they would do is if that didn't work, they would also say to the patient, if you are not willing, then we will transfer you to another hospital. Now, that's where it gets tough. I've had corporate clients, regular corporate clients, who've had to talk to a client. In this case, the example I'm thinking of is a client that told homophobic jokes, but this organization of a Fortune 100 company was very clear about their diversity policies and procedures. They had the next level boss address that client, knowing that they could lose a multi-million-dollar account, but essentially told that client, this is what our practice is, and we value diversity, et cetera, et cetera. And we protect the environment our employees are in when they come to see you. I mean, we expect them to be respected. And that includes telling jokes, whether or not the employee was gay, which wasn't relevant, whether the employee was gay. And they did not lose the client. The client did change his behavior. He stopped telling these jokes, but they knew going in the door, they might lose that client.
Right.
So that's where it gets, because that's where your character comes in as an organization. Are you saying this is the culture you want only when it's easy? Or is this the culture you want, period? Right. And so you really have to think through and talk through those things ahead of time. But it is certainly a situation that is coming up more and more.
Yeah, that's wow. And that really is, I mean, that is a commitment to the culture you want to create. That's a great demonstration of that right there. And I'm wondering how much of this, I honestly, Lenora, I could talk to you all day about this now too, because you're so knowledgeable. This is so good. How important is it also to kind of work with not just the leadership, but your team members, because like, so for instance, in the case of senior living, you also have people with dementia, some people that you're not going to be able to change what they do, what they say. So how important is it that when you have people of color or or people who may be hurt by some of the remarks, that you address that with them in some way so that they feel safe and protected, like you have their back, even maybe something they're dealing with in this environment?
One of the things in my sessions with keynotes or workshops and what have you, or in the executive coaching, where I have one-on-one conversations with the senior leadership individually, but one of the things that I point out and help people understand is, again, we all have biases, and those biases come from our background. That's what shapes who we are. And so in a senior living circumstance, and I'm very familiar with Alzheimer's and dementia because I've had people in my family who have suffered that disease. And I remember when my stepmom would say all kinds of things when she was, in the later years and full development of the disease. And so one of the things that I try to help people get to is, who you are, and that your culture respects you. We can't control the behavior of other people. Right. And so know that when they say or do certain things, it may be hurtful in the moment, but remind yourself that this is not their full self either, especially, when it's in a senior living circumstance. Excuse me. When it's not that circumstance, when it's a colleague that has said something to you, oftentimes what happens is people are well-intentioned. Most people don't get up in the morning trying to make you miserable.
Mm-hmm.
And in their effort to connect, in their effort to try to be inclusive, people get nervous around folks who are different than they are because they're different. And so they open mouth and insert foot with good intention.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example that comes up every time I have African American women or Black women, period, in my sessions. One thing that comes up often is a white woman will be intending to give a compliment to a Black woman who either has dreadlocks or she has long braids or a fancy braided hairdo. But rather than just say, wow, I love your hair, or something along those lines, they say, can I touch your hair? And they're already touching their hair. Their hand is already in their head, right? Now, the intention is good, but what I always say to my audience is intention is not enough. Impact is what's important. So now you have it on two sides. You have this person who has now done something that you might not like, and they were well intended, but how do you respond when it's happened to you, right? And so I teach a technique that helps people learn how to give feedback even in those uncomfortable situations and still be friends with the person you're talking to. But step number one is to park your ego at the door and assume positive intent. Assume the person had good intentions, but that's not good enough. And then you just tell the person how you feel when they did that. It's very diminishing. I felt disrespected. Because when we're talking across race, what oftentimes the dominant culture, in this case, Caucasians, white people, what they don't realize is because they are that dominant culture, the culture that's been in power, they unconsciously think it's okay to touch someone who is, in their mind, in a subordinate culture. So they're not even thinking of it. That is not their intention. Nobody told them they could do that, but they come from their environment. And their environment says the people in power can say certain things and do certain things to the people not in power. And so all of that's happening in a nanosecond. So both sides have to recognize that. The person who might have just done it can apologize. Oh my gosh, I didn't mean it that way. And the person who was the recipient may feel like the victim is, I understand that was not your intention. In the future, I would appreciate if you just give me a compliment and don't put your hands in my hair.
I love also empowering. Are you hearing that sound, Lenora?
I'm hearing a little bit of a buzz,
Okay.
sort of.
Hopefully, I'll lower my voice and maybe that will help. Seems like it is. What I love is that you're empowering both people there. So it's yes, the person, the offending person. There's change that has to happen there, but then also saying, but we, whoever the person is, in that situation, also must take responsibility to speak up. And what I love about that is being a woman, and with everything going on right now, that I always think, in terms of the Me Too movement and, all of that I always think there's two things. It's not just, what's been done to us, so to speak, but it's also what we have allowed and not speaking up. And so I think what you have just shared is really important.
Well, and I think we want to be careful. We want the person to whom it happened should speak up, but we also need to understand they may not, because it depends on how safe the culture is. If they are already feeling like an outsider, then they may not want to speak up because that would make them even more of an outsider. So then they may let it sit. So that's when it's the whole team's responsibility. It may be somebody else that might need to pull the quote unquote offender aside and just say, I happen to see this happen. Maybe Lenora wasn't offended. I don't know, but just want to give you a heads up. that
Yeah.
this might be another way to do that. And that's where the hard work is. You know, people want to pop a pill and become diverse. It just doesn't happen like that. It really takes a lot of practice, and it takes being willing to be vulnerable, to recognize that we all make mistakes, and then be open to new learning.
Yeah, and even as I was saying that, I realized, oh, that could sound like I was blaming the person.
Yeah, no, sometimes people take it that way, but yeah.
Yeah, and I certainly didn't mean that, but
Mhm.
you're right. Like it also depends on the situation, how safe you feel, and all of that,
Mhm.
whether you will or not. But I love the tool that you gave people, you know, the language that you gave people
Mhm.
to stand up, and whether it's yourself or a team member or whoever, that I think that's really, really helpful. Um, okay, some specific things that I know, you know, from our own clients that have expressed to me some of the things that they are dealing with. So I'll talk about one right now. And that is, what if you haven't taken the time to build that culture,
Mhm.
and yet you have now diverse people on your team, and there are challenges going on? And I would say probably exaggerated by and not at all to talk politics, but the climate that we're
Mhm.
living in right now, where, you know, that we have such extreme difference of thought.
Mhm.
And so, for instance, one of our customers I know is dealing specifically with the LGBTQ population, that they have, you know, people on their team, and then they have other people who are, you know, not supporters of that group. So, and they're really struggling with,
Struggling.
you know,
Mhm.
and so they're wanting to know, what do we do to
Yeah.
help bring people together, or at least help them be respectful of each other?
Yes. Yes. The whole concept of civility lately
Yeah.
seems to have gone out the window. Um, Let me address very specifically the LGBTQ and in the workplace, and let me address that, and then a little bit broader. Oftentimes, people who are straight or cis uh, think that the LGBTQ community is asking you to condone their behavior, whatever you think their behavior is. That is not accurate. The LGBTQ plus community
Hmm.
is asking that you respect them as human beings,
Right.
accept them as human beings. That's very different than condone.
Hmm.
And when I'm in conversation with people around this, very often people will say, well, you know, I don't care what they do in their bedroom, but they just don't, I don't want them to bring it to work. And they don't realize that what they're saying is, number one, gay people don't think about sex any more than straight people do. That's research. I'm not making it up. I mean, they're human beings, and they are so much more than just that aspect of who they are. And if you're saying, you know, I just don't want them talking about stuff or bringing it to work, well, one of the things that I point out to people is, you know, when you get to work on Monday and somebody asks you, what'd you do this weekend? Do you say, oh, I took the kids out and my spouse and I did blah, blah, blah. And in the old days, it used to be, you know, my husband and I, or my wife and I. Sometimes people will say spouse to be a little bit more inclusive. And usually their answer is yes. I tell them. And I said, well, think about it from a gay person's perspective. If they're working in a culture where they don't think they're accepted, they have to be 100% of the time very much thinking about every word they say. They might not even put the picture of their partner on their desk, or if they have kids, they might not put that picture because it'll generate questions. So when you say don't bring it to work, it's not about sex, it's about 100% of who they are. So now, but that's me having a conversation with someone. To your question of what do you do when you have this environment where people are feeling more emboldened to say or do things that maybe they would not have in the past, um, organizations really shouldn't assume anymore that in the workplace people are not going to talk about politics and religion, because they are.
Right.
And so what I invite organizations to do is, instead of having it be under the table, which impacts productivity, is to put it on the table. Again, it doesn't have to be specific about what political orientation you have one way or the other, but rather to address some of the things in the workplace that are a challenge these days, where people can just share, when people say this is how it makes me feel. So it's using the same technique I shared a moment ago, but actually having a team discussion around those kinds of things, and have the team come up with, well, what could we do different? Because I'm finding more and more some of the very specific things I used to teach 20 years ago on what used to be called being politically correct. Mm-hmm. And I really wasn't doing that much anymore. What I'm realizing is people really still need that. They really need the languaging. And so organizations can create that safe environment to say, okay, when we come into this room, we're going to speak candidly, and let's talk about what's getting in the way of us being productive with one another. Now, here's what they need before they ever do that. They need to be clear about what their HR policies and procedures are, and what their norm of behavior is, so that they can remind people of those things, that you can believe whatever you want. We're not about trying to change your beliefs, your faith, or any of that. That's not what it's about. What we're going to focus on is, how do we create a respectful, civil work environment? And then that way, when people bring up things, outside of work, I understand that could be happening. However, in the workplace, how can we be more inclusive and be more respectful of each other? And the key is for whoever the leaders are to not come in with all the answers. Pose the question and get people talking.
Love that. And you're right. We see this even in customer service, that a lot of times what's just helpful to them is to have the language, that they just don't have the language to have that conversation in a way. And so, these are really, really great tools. What about from a leadership standpoint, when I've heard someone say, kind of roll their eyes a little, or feel like sometimes people are coming to them with things that are excuses, like they blame, because of the Me Too movement, they blame this, or they're blaming this. So rather than do their work, they're saying we're discriminating, or this or that. How do you respond to that?
Great question. Great question for this reason. I just got back from last week. Just got back last week. I got back to where my office is, but last week I was working with an executive team that reports directly to the CEO, and the CEO was included in this team process. And so, because one of the things that I do are what I call executive briefings, but oftentimes it'll be with the whole team, and it's more of a discussion. It's not a training kind of thing. And so I had interviewed each one of the executive team ahead of time, one-on-one. And then at this retreat they were having, I came back with them, gave them some feedback, and we talked about how that team could work more effectively. So they were wanting to be more inclusive, but it was broader than just diversity and inclusion. And during one of the one-on-one interviews, a white man who has has risen through the organization, obviously if he's reporting to the CEO, has huge bottom line responsibility. After we got through all of my questions, he said, I know I'm well regarded here, but as a middle-aged white man, what chances do I have? So it's in today's environment, he said, I'm feeling like that this company is so focused on hiring more women, because it was a tech company, so focused on hiring more women that I don't really have a chance. And I'm not sure how I can coach my white male subordinates. And so I thought, number one, I was happy that he felt safe enough to ask the question. And what I said to him was, the difference between things that have happened in the past to get you to where you are is, number one, you're very good at what you do. So please know, I get that. You're very good at what you do. But you now realize that some of those opportunities came to you because you are a white male. Now, you have no control over that. But there are people that, I call them sponsors, people that saw your potential and mentioned your name in rooms when you weren't in the room. And that created opportunities for you. In today's environment, the folks who have not been included in those conversations, so whether it's women, whether it's people of color, whether it's millennials, pick a group. What today's environment is saying is your name should still be brought forward with other people's names. So bottom line, what it means is, yes, it's more competitive. It's harder. It may be harder than it has been in the past. So as you coach other people, what they need to stay focused on is, yes, they have to be very good at what they do. And then when a slate of 5 people are brought forward, sometimes they are going to be the best choice. And what will give them and you an edge is the more you get comfortable interacting with people different than you will have that diversity mentality, and that's an advantage. So even though your package might be white and male, if you get it, so to speak, if you understand the importance of diversity and inclusion, and you have modeled that, you can make sure that's part of the conversation when people are considering you for whatever the positions might be.
That is excellent. So what a great response. And I hope that was taken in, by everyone. I think that's so good. Lenora, and I'm looking at the time now, and I could ask you questions for 3 days on this. So let me ask the last question, which is, what else would you like to add? What else, and I know you could go on for 3 years probably, but just what do you think is the most important thing for our audience to know?
So I use an acronym called Be Basic. I guess it's called a mnemonic technically, but there's 6 things that if you do them as an individual, I think it will really take you far in the world of inclusion and diversity. So the first B is just the letter B, and that stands for breathe. Take a breath, because you literally will be feeding oxygen to your brain, which will go to what Daniel Kahneman calls the slow brain, and it'll allow you to think more logically instead of on your emotions. So definitely take a breath, especially when something just happened and you got offended, or you catch yourself judging people. Just take a breath. The next B, the B in the word basic, stands for be the other. Intentionally put yourself in circumstances where you are the only one. So if you happen to go to a place of worship, go to a different one. Go to one where the folks are not like you and they don't worship like you. And what you'll discover is all your stereotypes will come up, but you'll realize that's all that they are, that they're not truth, they're just stereotypes. So be willing to be the other. And I'm not assuming that you just go to a place of worship. It's any place where you would be different. The A stands for ask for feedback. Most of our biases are unconscious. So go to somebody that you trust, who you know well, not your spouse or not your partner, because there's too much emotion included in there. And that would, but could be a best friend or somebody at work, and say, I realized I have a bias about older people, or a bias about millennials, or pick something. And I'm not sure how it manifests itself. I need you to give me feedback when I say or do something. that demonstrates that bias. Now, don't throw me under the bus, but pull me aside at some point and point it out to me because I might not be aware. So ask for feedback. The S stands for assume. I mean, gosh, I just lost it for a second there. I say it so many times. I'll come back to the S. It'll come back to me. The I is invite others, meaning when you are pulling your team together, then invite people who are different than you. When you're having a dinner party, invite some people that are not the same people all the time. Now, don't just invite one, because then you'll put them on the spot, but invite a few people that are different, and it'll enhance the conversation. The C is check your ego at the door. And that's the hardest one, especially the older you are, because the older we are, the more we think we know everything. So check your ego at the door. And the S, for some reason, it's still gone. But I'll go back to something I said earlier. It doesn't start with an S, but it'll fit. Assume positive intent. Yeah. Remember that people are not getting up in the morning trying to make you miserable. At least most people aren't. And be willing to assume that they're coming from a good place, from their own biases, and so are you. And then hopefully you can meet somewhere in the middle.
Oh, that's wonderful. And we'll put the S in the show notes.
Yes.
I've totally been there. Oh, Lenora, this has been so fantastic. Thank you. I almost feel like we may revisit this again because I know there is so much more to say, but I'm so thrilled. I know this is going to be so valuable for everyone listening and watching. And let me ask you this, if people wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
So the easiest, fastest way is by email, and that would be Lenora, Lenora, at Ubuntu Global. It's all one word, ubuntuglobal.com, Ubuntu, the word global.com. I'm on Facebook just by my name, Lenora Billings-Harris. It's with a hyphen. And Diversity Coach on Facebook also, where I put a lot of learning kinds of things. Okay. And I'm on LinkedIn. And Twitter, my Twitter handle is LBH, those are my initials, LBH Diversity. So at LBH Diversity.
Perfect. Thank you. And as always, we would love to hear from you. So if you have comments, what was your biggest takeaway from today's session? Please put those in the comments below. You show us some love, hit like, and if you want to see more interviews like this with Lenora and with other experts, please hit subscribe, hit that little alarm button so you always get a notice when we have a new video. And thank you, Lenora, again, so much. It's been such a pleasure.
My pleasure as well. Ubuntu.
Ubuntu.